Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
A little while ago, I moved out of my parents' house and into a small flat about 5 kilometers south of where I used to live. The first day, I put the little furniture I had into the place with no problems whatsoever. On the first night, I stayed up late because it was the first time I had been on my own, all by myself and free from the hassles of living with other people. Second night, I got up early that night and slept like a baby. I slept the same for about a week after that. About a week and a day after I moved in, I would start waking up to what I thought was my mother coming into my room to wake me up for school, but when I opened my eyes, I realized that I didn't even live with her anymore, and I don't go to school. This would happen once every second day or so, and then it soon got to where it would happen every night, which was pretty bothersome. I figured I was just having trouble sleeping and I kept having a recurring dream, so I began taking sleeping pills and wearing earplugs to bed. I have a pretty awesome body clock that allows me to wake up within minutes of the time I chant to myself. Not a ritual thing, it just helps to get it stuck into my mind before going to sleep, so the earplugs weren't going to be a bother. It worked fantastic. I couldn't hear a thing and I woke up in the morning a little stiff, but rested. It didn't last long, though. About 3 days of using the stuff, I started waking up in the middle of the night to see nothing again. But this time, instead of hearing a noise, I felt breathing on my chin. By then I figured something weird was going on. I told my friends about it, but they just said I was desperate to get laid and it manifested itself in my dreams. I started to sleep with the light on and covered my face with my blanket. It seemed to have fixed things, but like before, it was only a temporary solution. What woke me up after that was when everything turned horrible. Instead of merely hearing a noise or feeling warm air brushing against my face, I was woken up by a nudge. Scared the shit out of me. I jumped and tore off the blanket only to see a fine mist in the air quickly fade out. At that point, I didn't really care what the hell was going on, I just needed to get out of there. I didn't even bother to get changed out of my boxer shorts. I just ran outside, locked the door. Yes, even if there were a demon in my house, I wouldn't want some bogan going in and stealing my stuff, got on my bike. I believe cars are bullshit unless you're going on a long trip, and rode as fast as I could to my mate's house about 1.5 kilometers down the road from me. The darkness hiding everything, leaving only silhouettes of gum trees against the sky, and the occasional streetlight illuminating circles of light on the ground didn't help my fear any, and I kept looking back frantically to see if whatever it was I saw was following me. I got to my mate's house and banged on the door wildly. He ended up opening the door about 20 seconds afterwards, standing there in his boxer shorts, holding a cricket bat, with a bewildered look on his face. He asked me what the hell I was doing there, and he let me inside. I told him what just happened, and he said I was crazy, but he said I could stay the night, so I did. The next day I went to the library and looked for some books that could explain to me what I had seen, but all I had found were some kooky books about demons trying to eat my souls, or ghosts possessing my furniture and property, so that didn't help. I went on the internet and talked with a guy that works with this sort of thing about what might have happened, but he told me that I should perform a ritual to cleanse the house, before the spirits take the house as their territory. Seemed like bull to me, and at the time I had gotten used to the idea of me just having hallucinated, and the previous encounters were just my mind playing tricks on me. Although looking back, I wish I had done that now. That night I decided that everything was just me going nuts, and that tonight would be different. I decided to brave it out and go without earplugs or sleeping pills, but I still wanted to keep the light on. If I did see that thing again, I would just try to get rid of it by reciting the Lord's Prayer. I had a shower, brushed my teeth, and got into bed, a little nervous about what may happen during the night, but I managed to drift off pretty easily. I was woken again by nudging. This time I figured that it was just my arm muscles twitching involuntarily, so I kept my eyes closed and tried to wait it out. It kept going for about 10 seconds, getting slowly more forceful, until I couldn't bear to keep my eyes closed any longer. I opened my eyes a little bit. There was an opaque foggy cloud about the size of a human head, with what was shaped like a crude neck and torso extending down towards the floor. Have you ever been so gripped by fear that you can't even move? The thought of being unable to escape from whatever may get to you only manages to scare you more, leaving you completely screwed unless you can calm down and get the hell out. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that. I just sat there, staring at it, whatever it was. It seemed to be staring back at me, feeling like it was waiting for me to do something. I couldn't get out this time. It seemed to have realized that I was afraid of it after I bolted out the door the first time it appeared. So I started to say the Lord's Prayer. Nervously stuttered, actually. When I opened my mouth, it jerked a bit, as if it were surprised I was saying something to it. About 10 words in, it changed from a white, thick foggy color to a beige, disgusting, almost palpable smoke. The smoke hovered over my torso and engulfed it inside of itself. Knowing that saying the Lord's Prayer didn't do a thing, I tried to move, but I couldn't. It was holding me down. Then I felt incredible, horrible pain in my abdomen. Felt like I was being stabbed with a kitchen knife. The pain was so intense that I involuntarily whimpered out loud, but quickly shut my mouth out of fear of it doing something worse. It kept getting slowly worse and worse until I blacked out. In the morning, I woke up, extremely groggy, barely able to remember what happened. I grabbed my blanket to get out of bed and noticed that it was soaking wet. I recoiled my hand from it, thinking it may have been piss or something, but it wasn't. It was blood. My whole blanket was drenched with blood, and it was leaking from my abdomen. I passed out, and when I came to, I was sitting in a hospital bed. Through the blinds of the window I could see that it was night time, and my mum was asleep in a chair by it. I called her, and she woke up. She rushed over to the side of my bed, and I asked her why I was in the hospital. She told me that my mate hadn't seen me for 3 days, and when he called I didn't answer my phone. He ended up bashing the front door in and found me lying under the blood-soaked blankets, extremely pale and barely breathing. I was rushed to the hospital and they found that I had lapsed into a coma. This had apparently happened 3 weeks ago. My mum started crying, saying through her heaving sobs that she thought I was gone forever, and she didn't know who had done this or why. I tried to tell her, but I realized that she wouldn't believe me and would assume that I had been depressed and done this to myself, where I would end up being counseled for who knows how long. I didn't want any of that, so I lied and told her that I woke up and found some asshole stealing my TV. I was hoping she didn't know that I was lying under the blanket when I was found, and it looked like she believed me, so everything was all right. I stayed in the hospital for a few days until I could be cleared to leave, and went back to my flat with my mate and my mum. Apparently the landlord had been sympathetic and allowed me to keep living in the house, so long as I had paid 20% of the rent while I was gone, which my parents had paid for me. What a waste. I told my mum I'd be all right with my mate from there, and she reluctantly left. We went into the house, and I told him I needed to get out of there. This place was evil. At first he didn't know what the hell I was talking about, until he remembered the night I had gone over to his place after being scared out of my mind. I told him about the fog thing stabbing me, and he said it was probably just me dreaming while some burglar accidentally stabbed me or something. He wasn't going to believe me, so I asked him if he would stay the night with me because I was still feeling a bit edgy about being there alone. He agreed, and he went back to his place to get some stuff to bring over. That night I told him that I knew that thing was going to come back, so I forced him to recite the Lord's Prayer with me and help me perform the ritual that the guy on the internet told me to do. So we said the Lord's Prayer, and we started to do the ritual, when halfway through the house bellowed a low rumbling noise. I suddenly stopped and asked my mate if he had heard that. He rationalized it by saying it was just a truck going past the house. I knew better. The sound pushed me into screaming at him that the thing was going to kill us, and we couldn't do anything to avoid it. But he was so adamant in his belief that I was wrong that he said he would sleep right in my room, on the bed where I was attacked, for the whole night, just to prove that this was all in my head. I pleaded with him, I begged him not to do it, but he said it was the only way I'd stop talking about this ghost New Age rubbish. I set up the couch in the lounge room where I was planning to sleep, and he went into my room to set up my bed. Before we finally went to bed, I asked him if he would please reconsider because I was afraid for his life, but he refused and shut the door. I went back out to the lounge room and left the lights and TV on and lay awake, waiting for something to happen. 2 hours of waiting and nothing. It was 1:12 in the morning on the clock, and nothing had happened. I always woke up about midnight, so it seemed like we were in the clear, and I relaxed a little bit. I shut my eyes and slowly drifted off to sleep. When I woke in the morning, I felt absolutely perfect. I turned off the light and threw open the curtains to allow the sunlight to pour into the room. I felt happier than I had in a month, and it was all thanks to my mate who really cared about me. I decided to see if my mate was awake so I could thank him for staying the night and proving me wrong. I opened the door and saw him lying there peacefully with the blanket tucked right up to his neck. Turns out he left the window open at night and it got a bit chilly for him. I closed the window and gave him a little shove to wake up. He didn't wake up, so I pushed him a little harder. Still nothing. Stubborn bastard. I told him to get up and pulled off the blanket. The skin of his body had been slashed, his organs were strewn in and out of the deep cuts, his whole body was stained blood red from the collarbone down, and he was shriveled, as if he were a corpse that had been sitting out in the desert sun for a month. My friend was dead. I couldn't believe my eyes. The nightmarish creature had brutally mutilated his body. This was too much. I couldn't call the police, they wouldn't help, they couldn't help. This is something much more than anything a taser or bullets can destroy. I decided not to call the police. Couldn't move my mate because I didn't want to disturb him. Yes, I know that sounds odd, but if you've ever seen a loved one die, you still care about their body as if it were still breathing. I went back onto the internet and found the guy I had talked to earlier. I told him everything that had happened, and he said that the putrid color and bloody violent nature of the thing were reminiscent of a demon named Tothet, who would observe humans while sleeping, examine their dreams to help Lucifer destroy the minds of men by exploiting their deepest fears. He told me of another ritual on how to destroy the demon, but it required a blood sacrifice of my own on a cherished childhood item, and a tantra to shout at the beast. I immediately ran out of the house, got on my bike, and rode as fast as I could to my parents' house. I banged on the door, and they let me in. They tried asking me questions, but I didn't answer them. I immediately ran into my old room and grabbed an old necklace I used to wear off the shelf, and proceeded to get back on my bike and pedal like Alberto Contador back to the house. I went into the kitchen and pulled out a knife, then slit the side of my hand, and bled onto the necklace. I had the charm, and I had the ritual. Now I had to confront the demon. I went into my room and looked at my mate again. I couldn't bring my eyes off of his face. There was something strange about it. It didn't look whole anymore. It looked like him, there was just something off about it. Something terrifying. His head just moved. I saw it move. I took a step back. He slowly opened his eyes and whispered something inhuman. I had never heard so frightened of anything in my entire life. The sky suddenly dimmed into a deep black. It was as if night had come, but the stars had fallen from the sky. The room plunged into darkness. I went for the door and tried the knob. It wouldn't open. My heart started racing. I could feel it nearing me. I was stuck in the room and I couldn't get out. I held up the charm in front of me and shouted the tantra. Everything suddenly froze. Time itself seemed to have stopped, and I couldn't move. I heard nothing but its rasping, gurgling breaths as it inched toward me, feet dragging on the ground like something unused to walking upright. I felt the walls expand and fade away, leaving us in a dark, empty void. I couldn't escape. There was nowhere to go. The sound of its feet dragging across the space between us sent trills of terror up my spine as each shuffled step drew closer and closer, and yet I still couldn't turn to face the terror behind me. I felt a cramp start in the arch of my foot as I tried desperately to command it to move. It raced up my leg, a clenching in my calf, a deep ache in my thigh, but still I didn't move an inch. My hands were fisted so tightly I could feel the nails digging into the soft flesh of my palms, blood pooling between my fingers. Every impulse in my body was screaming, "Move, you bastard," but I couldn't budge. The slow, uneven shuffling came closer. As its foul, rot-infused breath began to brush hotly against the back of my neck. Something snapped in me. I felt something inside come loose as I began to scream. I barely recognized my own voice in the animal howling that poured out of me, the guttural wailing that seemed ripped from my very core. My legs jerked violently, sending me numbly tumbling to the ground. As I fell, I caught a glimpse of something so unholy I instinctively closed my eyes, flailing madly against it as if I were a child. I heard it lunge. Eyes clenched against the onslaught, I dimly registered voices filtering in. A soft beeping seemed to fill the air, echoing inside my head. The dark began to slowly change into the pale pink. I was used to seeing behind my closed eyelids. I could hear my mum's voice vaguely, as if she were 100 years away, and a man's voice. I tried to open my eyes to see who he was, but the lids just felt so heavy. Finally, I pried them open, and as I adjusted to the bright fluorescent lights that seemed to bathe every surface of the room in light, I heard Mum gasp and felt the pressure on my hand. She said she didn't know I was so upset, that she'd never have let me out of the house if she'd had any clue. She promised to make it all better and told me that she'd canceled my lease and moved my things back into the house. She said they wanted to keep me for observation, 3 weeks this time, but I could go home when it was over and she would take care of me. The whole time she cried and cried, saying it was all her fault. I tried to reassure her that I was okay, but all I could do was squeeze her hand. Those 3 weeks I spent in the hospital psych ward were the most peaceful days of my entire life. I did nothing but relax, sleep, and talk to doctors about my depression. I learned early on not to talk about what had really happened or they'd drug me to my eyebrows, but eventually they decided that I was healthy enough to go home to my parents' house, as long as I took it easy and didn't let myself get worked up too much. I didn't ask about my mate the entire time. I think part of me really didn't want to know, and part of me was scared to know. When I got out of the hospital, my parents threw a welcome home party for me, but not very many people came. The ones that did only seemed to stick around long enough for the cake before excusing themselves and disappearing. They didn't make eye contact with the crazy guy. I went up to my old room and found all of my stuff had been set up just the way it was before I left home, as if I'd never moved out at all. Surrounded by familiar things, I drifted off to sleep. Mum woke me after a little while to take my pills, but I slept peacefully all night long. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of breakfast cooking. My mum hadn't done a full breakfast since I was a kid, and even though I knew she was only doing it because she felt guilty, I wanted to take advantage of the rare occasion. I jumped in the shower and washed up quickly, then wrapped a towel around my waist and set up to shave. I noticed I had one of those safety razors with a metal mesh holding the blades in and rolled my eyes. Everyone still thought I was wanting to self-terminate. Then, I opened the cabinet to get my shaving cream, but as I closed the door I saw a dark shape flit across the mirror. It chilled me deeply, and I stared at my razor a long while before deciding that a beard might not be such a bad look for me. Still shaky, I put the razor and can of cream away and headed to my room to dress. Downstairs, with the smell of bacon and coffee in the air and sunlight pouring in the window, it was easy to forget the dark shape, and I spent the rest of the day sitting around the house watching TV or toying on the computer. After a few days I was settling into a comfortable routine: sleep, eat, TV, eat, sleep, and more TV, in no particular order. Strange things kept happening, dark shapes darting down the halls or across mirrors or behind corners out of the corner of my eye, but I chalked it up to the meds I was still taking with clock-like regularity. I felt my life returning back to normal, and of course, that's when it happened. I shouldn't have asked, but I was genuinely curious. I asked my mum what happened with my mate, as I hadn't heard anything from him since that night. She paused a long time, then told me he'd gone missing. The police were figuring he'd been dead at least a week, and his landlord said he'd been missing for longer. A month, she said. I laughed nervously and told her I'd seen him since then. He'd been with us when I moved back after the stabbing. She looked at me oddly and asked to talk about something else. All day, the thought nagged at the back of my mind. He'd been there that day, he'd helped me check out of the hospital. She knew that, right? She'd talked to him. Frowning, I realized that I couldn't actually remember hearing them speak with one another. A cold chill had wormed its way up my spine and settled around my shoulders the more I thought about it. I ended up crawling into bed and wrapping my blankets around myself, falling into a fitful sleep. That night I dreamed my mate was sitting on the end of my bed. He had my necklace on and he didn't say anything, only staring at me. Slowly, he lifted his hand and waved, a smile spreading across his face. Choking in horror and revulsion, I woke up and vomited across the floor, my stomach seizing. Instead of a mouth, he'd had a dark, gaping maw the color of rotten flesh that had spilled out, splashing on the blanket in wet, chunky splats. I was still dry heaving when my mom found me. Since then, I've noticed it more. The faces in the wood, the dark shadows jumping around, the figures in the mirrors. They've been getting bolder, staying longer, defying me. I pretended for the longest time that it wasn't happening, but the day the faces appeared in the veins in my arm, I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to cut the faces out with a kitchen knife, but it hurt so bad my fingers were shaking too hard to cut cleanly. Mum cried the whole time I was in the emergency room, and when they moved me to my new room this time. I can hear those shuffling footsteps in the hall outside my room every night now. Last night I woke up with a nosebleed and found that necklace under my pillow. I see the faces in the imitation wood grain of my nightstand and the figures reflected on the inside of the window. It won't be long now. It won't be long now.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.